So we have a great program tonight, and Steven's piece is opening it. As you may or may not know, we have 6 pieces this year that have been commissioned by Leonard Slatkin from some of his favorite composers that he's worked with throughout the years. He didn't go to those composers. He went to those composers and said, hey, can you pick a former student of yours that you're really proud of and that you think would be a great person to have showcased in this year of kind of world premieres? And so Leonard went to somebody that was like probably the closest composer to his heart, Cindy McTee, his wife. And Cindy chose Steven. And Steven is actually kind of a double whammy because he's also a student of John Corigliano, who we have another premiere of one of his students later this year. Or maybe it has already happened. I can't keep track of them all, actually. So many. Yes. But so we thought we'd get you a little bit of introduction into Steven before we talk about his wonderful piece, and just to have you get to know him a little bit better. So Steven, tell us, you grew up in the South, in Arkansas. I'm from Texas, so there's a great affinity down there. There's a lot of wonderful band music, a lot of great orchestral music, kind of growing up in the schools. How did you actually get into being a musician?
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming early and coming to this. I grew up in a musical household. My father was a trumpet player, jazz trumpet player, as well as legit, I guess is the word, and a band director in Arkansas, and an arranger. So music paper, music instruments, everything was around the house all the time, and it just seemed natural. I was drawn to the piano. I didn't really like practicing my music for my lessons, but I loved writing my own stuff and just noodling and improvising, and so I think that was the genesis. And then in high school, I started writing for my friends, whether it was a pep band arrangement for a basketball band or an entire original piece for my high school band. We didn't have a high school orchestra, sadly, so I wrote for the biggest ensemble we had.
Very nice. And then yesterday, it actually came out and asked you what was your earliest memory of writing actually something down, and it's pretty impressive.
I was 6, maybe it was 7. I just started piano, and so I'd actually learned how to draw the clefs and what the notes were, and I was fascinated with odd time signatures from the very beginning. So it's in D minor and it's in 6/4, and that makes it sound much more impressive than it actually is.
And you actually found it recently,
no,
right?
I'm still looking for it.
Oh, you're still looking for it. Okay, I thought when you went back to your house, you might have found it when you were cleaning out old things. That would be that'd be a fun thing to put on your wall for sure at home. So when you said your dad was a jazz and legit player and he had gone to North Texas, that was actually where you studied with Cindy. Now, was that because of your dad that you kind of had that on your radar and wanted to go to North Texas, or kind of what was your college career like?
My undergraduate was in a tiny college in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. I studied with a great composer there, Francis Macbeth, and he was hilarious, and it was really great. I definitely needed to be a big fish in a small pond, because University of North Texas is one of the biggest ponds there is. Massive music school, and so I did my master's there, and yeah, it was on my mind because my father had gone there, and it just seemed like the huge resources and an amazing place, and I got there and I met Cindy and said, she's the one I need to study with.
Definitely. And what with Cindy, I know if you read kind of some of the program notes, you'll see what Steven says about time and how a lot of his pieces have to do with time, and not necessarily the length of the piece, but kind of your perception of time. And you kind of had a little bit of an epiphany of this when you were working with Cindy, I think, and if you'll tell them a little bit about how that came to be.
Sure. I mean, she emphasizes that a lot with all of her students, and we read a book, Jonathan Kramer's book, The Time of Music. I mean, that couldn't get any more literally on topic. And I remember one particular lesson, I was stuck, and I was still writing the music with pencil and paper. It's this long ago. Now I use a computer. And I was just stuck, and you can't be stuck because you have lessons. You got to bring in something. So I brought in all the pages I had, and she had me just lay them across the floor of her office so we can get kind of a bird's eye view of this and try to figure out the problem and see the music in a different way than just bar by bar. And it must have worked. I finished the piece. So.
Very good. Well, and then we were visiting backstage before we came out, and you said you went to our DIA today and saw all this wonderful artwork. And you said something, I think, that was really interesting to me because I'd never thought about it that way. But as perusing the art gallery, you can kind of go at your own pace. You can stare at a painting as long or as little as you want to. But as a composer, you're kind of crafting that experience for us, right? You get to tell us how long we get to experience things. And so talk a little bit about that, because I found that immensely fascinating when you were speaking about it.
That's one of the most compelling things for me as a composer, is that I get to control your experience of time. Hopefully you won't just get up and leave in the middle of the piece. But that's very important to me, that I view that as, you know, when you're in the zone or you're enthralled with something, you lose sense of time. And being able to create that experience for you is one of my main guiding principles in writing music. And I view it as like shaping the topography of time and your experience of it. And just looking for all the different ways I can do that. And because it's what I want to experience when I'm out there listening to a piece of music. And so that's my guiding principle is, okay, I'm out in the audience, what would really enthrall me?
And you've done things not just for orchestra, but as you said, for wind band. In your bio, it says you've written a piece for 650 people. That's really fun because it's a lot to do with education too. And I know your dad was a band director. You have a very big passion for music education. When you approach something for, say, younger students and younger musicians as opposed to, say, the DSO, do you think about it any differently, or is it just a little bit maybe easier than it would be for the DSO musicians?
It's actually one of the most difficult things to do is write music that is easy for younger musicians. I could throw just about anything in front of this group here, and they might grumble, but they'll make it happen. And you can look, I can look awesome because I give some virtuosic part to one of the soloists, and they play the heck out of it. When you're dealing with younger musicians, they have not only a limited range, number of notes they can play, they're not used to rhythms that are independent, just the embouchure. They don't have the musculature to make the dynamic contrast, the really soft softs and the really loud louds, which I love, that contrast. So all of you're working with a much smaller box, and I still have to make something that I find compelling. And so what I do is I put myself in the space of when I was in 8th grade band or a young musician, like, what would have captured my imagination in class that day and made me come out of that thinking about that instead of what's for lunch.
Sure. And I think that's what's so great about composers that do write for every genre and every group of musicians, because now I hope some of those kids that have played your music are actually going to be watching our webcast tonight, and they'll say, like, oh, I hope I get to do that one day. You know, I'm playing this piece by Steven Bryant, but I want to play that one day too. So talking about the way that you kind of compose your pieces and influences, I gave a modern music lecture to some of our patrons on Wednesday night, talking kind of about the history of modern music and how it all kind of is related to not just classical music, but even jazz and pop and rock and electronics. Who are some of your biggest influences, you think, not just in the classical music world, but in all of music?
Well, as I mentioned last night, there's so many, I could just keep listing names until we're all asleep. One of them in the electronic side, I don't know that anybody will know who this is, Trent Reznor from this band 9 Inch Nails, huge sound design, and it's influenced a lot of my orchestral and band music, which it has nothing to do with on the surface. On the classical side, my teachers, obviously, who I neglect to mention, but they're a huge influence. Francis Macbeth, John Creel, I know, and of course Cindy McTee. There's a reason I studied with them, and their music actually shows up in my music, sometimes literally. Yeah, early Stravinsky, some Bartók, fittingly enough, and Strauss too. Absolutely, I don't know if you'll hear that, but those have been departure points, sparks when I've discovered their music early on. It's like, oh, you could do that. Okay, I want to do that. And
kind of segueing now into the piece tonight, Zeal, it actually starts with just this little gem of something you heard in a Björk piece, Hyper Ballad, with this kind of suspended cymbal with brushes. And talk about that a little bit.
All right, so the very first thing you're going to hear in my piece, and it starts very quietly with the cymbals in the back. There's actually two of them. One's playing a rhythm, and the other one's just rolling on a sizzle cymbal. And if you don't know what a sizzle cymbal is, it's either a standard cymbal mounted as a ride cymbal with holes drilled in it and little rivets in it, or in this case, they have just a little chain hanging off of it, so it rattles more and gets more kind of a white cloud of partials. So one player is rolling on that, and the other one's playing a rhythm with some brushes, and it just, there's a rhythm, but it's also a kind of a cloud that it's floating, not entirely distinct. And I asked them to actually make it more distinct as the piece goes on. And that was a sonic experience I had with Björk's Hyper Ballad, if you know that tune. It opens the same way, and not the same rhythm, but that sonic inspiration was my spark for this piece.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you said about these different things. You'll hear something, and it's not that anybody else would even maybe recognize that that's what it is, because it just is kind of the inspiration for you to write that piece. What are you working on next?
I'm very fortunate. I have a huge number of pieces coming up. I have a spreadsheet that lists all of them and which month I have to write them.
How good are you about keeping to those deadlines? Or are you kind of like the last week, like, oh, I got to get 90 pages done or something?
I have learned over the years how much time I need and how much extra time I need to build in, because these are legal contracts, these are commissions. Sure. It's not a homework thing I can turn in late. I am I'm pretty good about hitting the deadline right at the deadline. And those last couple of weeks, as my wife will attest to, are not always the most fun. So I have a piece for the University of Illinois. Their college band program is 150 years old next year, and so they wanted me to write a big piece to celebrate that. And another large piece with electronics and winds and maybe even, I don't know, lighting. We'll see. I don't even know yet. They've told me, go shoot for the moon, which is dangerous. And actually, I didn't mention yesterday, I'm working long-term with the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble to create something truly extraordinary. We're in the very beginning stages, so keep your eye on them. They're amazing.
Very cool. Yeah, very awesome. Well, we're going to open it up to the audience and have them ask any questions that they might have for you. Don't be shy. Yes?
I'm mystified at how you could musically express an idea of time in a piece of music. How do you draw that together to make that an expression in your music?
That's a great question, and I'm thinking. So there's different ways of talking about and thinking about time in music. Now mine has a groove. Time is marked in a regular fashion. Not every piece does that, but I wanted for this piece to do that. And so immediately, I don't know if your heartbeat or your pulse will synchronize with it, though there's some evidence in choirs and those sorts of things that people's heartbeats do synchronize. But I'm dividing time now. And so you're starting to mark it. And then what we do is we hear an idea, and if we hear it a second time, we start making patterns. So we expect it a third time, and when you violate that third time, I mean, opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is a classic example of that. And it's sort of something about our brains does that. And so that's one way I use of setting up expectation of a pattern and then violating it just enough that you're surprised but not lost.
Great question.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes?
Do you write linearly or do you bounce around in a piece, like write the end first and then come back?
Oh, that's a great question. So the question is, do I write linearly, like from beginning to end, or do I jump around? The answer is it depends. The larger works I write, I spend a lot of time writing prose documents, text documents on my computer. This happens, then this happens. Here's the ultimate goal. I want this to be kind of the core experience down here at takeaway, and how do I set that up, and how many movements, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of architectural stuff, and that came also from all of my teachers in various ways, thinking about time and thinking about structure first. And then sometimes I just start at the beginning, I get a groove, and I just see where it takes me. This piece that you're going to hear tonight, it builds and does this, and then right toward the end, it really unleashes. And that's I didn't do that by accident. I actually wrote a big chunk of that first, knowing, okay, this is where we're going. How is it going to be most effective to hold that back and get there? So there'll be a chunk of it, and then I'll just kind of improvise my way there. It's sort of like fumbling through the dark, but you sort of know the way. I kind of know where I'm going, but there'll be some surprises along the way for me as well.
Yes? Color mapping? Oh.
What exactly do you mean? Like
with different instrument, like combination of instrument sounds, maybe you mean?
You mean the orchestral colors, orchestration? If I understand what you're asking, I don't do it so literally, like I will use this sort of palette of sounds and, well, maybe I do. Sometimes I think about I want a world of nasal sounds like harmony-muted trumpets and oboes and those sorts of things, and then I want to change it to a very warm palette where all the strings come in and maybe the low clarinets. So I do think in terms of, yeah, orchestrational worlds of sound. Mapping makes it sound a lot more ordered and conscious than I think about it, but if that's what you're asking, I do that, yes.
And there was another question over here, I think. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, they commissioned it. I got an email out of the blue about 2 years ago, which is really exciting, sort of a composer's dream. Like, the Detroit Symphony would like to commission you. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I don't think I've ever replied to an email faster. And then, of course, that's a year or two process. That's entirely typical. And then, yeah, yesterday was the world premiere. The very first time I ever heard a note of it live was on Wednesday morning.
And I think that's what a lot don't even realize coming, that this process is so fast once it actually gets to the orchestra, because the musicians are so wonderful, and it's all about kind of bringing all the parts together at that point and kind of making little things. And actually, there was notes written just 72 hours ago, because for the Bartok, you'll notice the celeste is right here, right up next to Leonard's stand, and the harp's going to move over here because the harp and the celeste in the Bartok concerto are really, really prominent. And in Steven's piece, there was a part for the harp that is it's very important. It's the main line, but we were having a little bit of trouble hearing it. So Leonard had the suggestion, hey, we've got the celeste already upstage. Why don't you consider putting that in there? So Steven went and wrote it really quick, and so you'll hear that part coming out of the celeste, and it's kind of a fun position. And the other really fun, this is just a fun tidbit, is that the celeste player is married to Wei Yu, who's our principal cellist, and so they get to sit really close together. So if you see them like, making eyes at each other, then that's why.
If I'd known that, I would have written like a little duet for them.
That's good. That's good. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, I didn't even ask that last night.
That's fine. Titles are difficult. In this case, the title came down toward the very end of the process, because this piece is very straightforward. It's 5 minutes. It burns with this very straightforward intensity. I wanted to feel like it's on rails. So I had this character that I knew, but it doesn't tell a story. You might evoke one in you, and that's totally great. But I don't have like, this happens, then this happens, and it means this. But the word zeal came to me. First of all, it didn't need to be a really long title because it's not a really long piece, and I didn't want to seem too pretentious. But this idea of something burning with I feel like it's a very joyful piece. Certainly by the end, it's a euphoric piece. I hope that it is. But there's something seductive about absolute certainty and belief, whether it's religion or sports teams or whatever. We're all fanatical about something at some point, and there's something in our brains, again, that really seems to feed off of that, and really, in that moment, you feel very alive, but there's a sinister aspect to it, too, and so something about that really appealed to me, and also I was running out of time, and I had to choose a title.
What was it Bernstein said? For success, you just need a plan and too little time,
yeah,
or
not
something?
Quite enough time.
Yeah, not quite enough time. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
So when they give you the commission, do they have bookends as be so many minutes long, and so you don't just write 27 seconds of silence and smile?
Oh, wow, that would have been easier. Yes, there are definite parameters on any commission. This was and all of this series, they're openers. They're planned to be the first piece on the program. I think the contract specified 4 to 10 minutes, somewhere in that range, which is actually a large range, because a 4-minute piece and a 10-minute piece are very different pieces of music. So that was an interestingly wide range. And they said not solemn, specifically, not solemn. This is not solemn. No. This is the opposite of solemn. But aside from that, and there's I can't just throw a theremin or whatever other instruments I want in there. I have to draw from what they have. I couldn't ask for 16 horns, though I would if I could. But outside of those parameters, it's whatever you want to make, which is great.
Is it easier to have parameters?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I didn't know if it was more difficult when they're like, just write us whatever you want, and then you have to kind of, like with Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble, is that a little open-ended in some ways, or do you have a specific?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out even what it is we're going to make. It's more than just a piece of music. It's a dramatical thing. And same thing with Arizona State, where they said, go, okay, I don't know, let's go to low Earth orbit. I mean, how crazy do you want to get?
Yeah, definitely. Yes?
So it's sort of two questions. The instrumentation because a string quartet or a symphony orchestra is, I guess, classical, and I am writing for this. I've written larger works that might be called, so the symphony can also mean a symphony, a 4-movement work. I haven't written anything I've called a symphony. I've written some really big pieces. I don't think I'm ready to call anything a symphony, though. And wait till I'm like older. That's all right, we're already there. So I'm not sure if I can answer. I haven't written a string quartet because that terrifies me, because there's so many amazing ones. I don't know that I have anything yet to say with a string quartet. I don't know, am I answering your question or am I just talking a lot?
Well, and
Okay.
I think a question last night was, had you written any concertos? And you said, I never had, but then I started getting commissions for them. And so you've written for Joe Alessi and...
Joe Luloff,
Joe Luloff,
saxophone over
yeah.
at Michigan State. Actually, he's coming tonight, he and his
Oh,
wife.
fantastic.
Yeah, he's great. I've written 4 concerti. I swear I'd never write one. So don't ever swear I will never do something, because then you will definitely be doing it. So in that way, I guess you could say traditional, but I don't know that anybody would ever say my music is traditional. I don't know, you tell me.
Is there a ensemble type that you find just kind of flows more easily from your thoughts?
I much prefer large numbers of people and instruments. A symphony orchestra or a wind ensemble, I am much more comfortable with 60 or 80 people than I am 2. But back earlier when I mentioned I love that contrast, the very soft to the very large, and the grandiose and the very intimate. I love all of those experiences within a particular piece, and that I find is more difficult when you have, say, 2 flutes, which I love the flute, but fortissimo for 2 flutes is not the same as fortissimo for an entire symphony orchestra, right? That's an entirely different meaning and sonic experience, and so what I've drawn to is large masses of instruments.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Oh, yes. Oh, we got 2. Good.
Does it sound the same when it's performed versus in my head? I'm a lot less nervous in my head, first of all, because I'm at home alone, you know, or in my pajamas. So maybe that's why it sounds, yes, it sounds different, but it's much more exciting live. I mean, why else I would just sit at home and just imagine music all day and be satisfied. And it's also, yeah, there's a million different things. And it's not about the players. There's the acoustics of the space and the kind of characteristics of each ensemble that'll play a piece. So it's never identical to my mind, but that's a good thing. It surprises me, and there's something about that surprise that I love. It's part of why I do this.
And there was another question up here. Yes.
So my compositional process and what software do I use? We're back to the fanatical question. If anybody's using any software, it's Finale or Sibelius, and people divide into camps. I use Finale because I started it in 1993 before there was a Sibelius, its competitor, and I've got 20 some odd years of music in it now. But I don't write into that software. That is only for the engraving, for what the players see. I write into another program now called Digital Performer, which is a sequencer. All you need to know is it kind of looks like a piano roll. I see these colored bars that represent the different instruments, kind of time, and then I can just move stuff around. I don't use any bar lines or any meter until I'm completely finished, and that's why there are a lot of meter changes. And then my wife, who's a conductor and who's here, and I conduct through it when I'm done, and like, oh, that feels like a downbeat. This is mostly in 4. No, that's a 3/4 bar. And we just do all that, and then I go into Finale at that point. So, and yes, I have fully orchestrated. I have a track, flute 1, flute 2, flute 3, trumpet 1 open, trumpet 1 harmony mute, trumpet 1 straight. It's a massive, massive, massive file. I have a really large screen.
And yet, I think you said you're about to write, or you just wrote something for chorus, and you went back to pencil and paper.
Yeah, I just wrote a choral work for the BBC Singers last summer, and I actually went back to pencil and paper for that, which was, it was really fascinating, and I loved it. I love the tactile sense of that. But that's a lot fewer staves than an orchestra. So, there's
Yes.
one with the hand up there.
Yes.
Do you mean like synesthesia, where you see, we see certain colors, certain chords or notes? I know people who are like that. I'm not. And I don't really perform. That's why I'm a composer. I don't like being on stage that much. I like to be back there, and I love it because they work really hard, and then I get up and take a bow, which is really, really fun. Yeah. Have we answered all the questions there are?
I think so. I hope we're not missing anyone. But thank you so much for coming. You're going to love Steven's piece, Zeal. It starts our program. And then we have Yoon Shin playing Bartok, Violin Concerto No. 2, Wagner's Siegfried Idol, and then Till Eulenspiegel, which is just a raucous way to end the night.
Amazing.
So enjoy the concert. Thank you so much for coming to pre-concert, and thank you, Steven.
Thank you.